Henry James's novel, The Portrait of a Lady, commences at Gardencourt, the rural abode of Mr. Touchett. During a tea gathering with his son Ralph, the duo entertains Lord Warburton, a friend. The arrival of Mrs. Touchett from America marks her return, accompanied by their niece, Isabel Archer. Isabel, recently orphaned, possesses two married elder sisters. Mrs. Touchett aspires for Isabel to acquire sophistication and secure a husband. Prior to Isabel's arrival, Lord Warburton explicitly states his disinclination towards marriage unless encountering an exceptionally captivating woman. Upon meeting Isabel, Warburton finds her intriguing and falls in love. He extends an invitation for her to visit his home, where she encounters his two sisters, forming a favorable impression of all three. Isabel considers Warburton not only wealthy and socially well-placed but also kind and sensitive. Meanwhile, Isabel receives correspondence from her friend, Henrietta Stackpole, an American journalist in Europe. Inviting Henrietta to Gardencourt, Isabel is later approached by another American, Caspar Goodwood, who expresses his intention to marry her. Perturbed by his transatlantic pursuit, Isabel chooses not to respond to his letter. Warburton arrives to propose, but Isabel, though fond of him, hesitates to rush into marriage. Opting to explore the world first, she sends a letter rejecting Warburton's proposal, causing vexation to him, as well as her aunt and uncle. Warburton seeks an explanation for her refusal, but Isabel, though kind, remains resolute. A London visit follows for Ralph, Henrietta, and Isabel. Ralph discovers his attraction to Isabel, while Henrietta forms a connection with Ralph's acquaintance, Mr. Battling. Caspar reappears, renewing his proposal to Isabel. In response, she pledges to contemplate his proposal if he remains interested in 2 years, allowing her the opportunity to embark on personal adventures. Meanwhile, Ralph is summoned home upon learning of his father's illness. Returning to Gardencourt with Isabel, they discover that Madame Merle, Mrs. Touchett's associate, is still present. Despite Ralph's own health issues, he persuades his father to allocate half of his inheritance to Isabel. Concerned that such wealth might attract fortune hunters, Mr. Touchett worries about Isabel's vulnerability. Ralph, however, assures his father of Isabel's independence, countering the notion of her becoming a victim. Following Mr. Touchett's demise, Ralph seeks recuperation in the Mediterranean, while Mrs. Touchett and Isabel journey to Paris, reuniting with Henrietta and Mr. Battling. Before returning home, Isabel and Mrs. Touchett visit Ralph. Though Isabel maintains her perspective on the inheritance, she departs with Ralph's reassurances. Continuing to Florence, Isabel and Mrs. Touchett encounter Madame Merle, who has informed Gilbert Osmond about Isabel and her wealth, orchestrating a plan for their marriage. Merle discloses this to Isabel, also arranging a meeting with Gilbert. Isabel visits Gilbert's residence, meeting his sister, the Countess Gemini, and his 15-year-old daughter, Pansy. Crucial revelations emerge. Merle aims for Gilbert and Isabel to marry, securing Pansy's future with Isabel's fortune for a favorable marriage. The Countess, despite her disapproval, is aware of the plan but takes no action to prevent it. Gilbert possesses social standing but lacks substantial wealth due to his extravagant tastes. Aware of Ralph's mistrust towards Madame Merle and Gilbert's financial troubles, Isabel becomes cautious. While Mrs. Touchett starts to harbor suspicions about Gilbert, Isabel is drawn to his social graces, convinced that he can provide the sophistication she sought in Europe. Despite warnings from Henrietta and Ralph, and rejecting Caspar once again, Isabel decides to marry Gilbert after a year of travel. Mrs. Touchett, now suspecting Madame Merle's influence, objects to the marriage. After 4 years, Isabel realizes the misery of her union, understanding that Gilbert was motivated solely by her wealth. His selfish and controlling nature contributes to her unhappiness. When Ralph, on his deathbed, requests her presence at Gardencourt, Gilbert refuses, leading Isabel to seek the truth from the Countess. She discovers that Pansy is not Gilbert's legitimate child from his first marriage, but the result of a long affair with Madame Merle. Despite Gilbert's disapproval, Isabel goes to Gardencourt and confides in Ralph, admitting he was right about Gilbert. They both acknowledge that her inheritance has compromised her spirit and happiness, contemplating how to rectify her situation. After Ralph's death, Isabel remains at Gardencourt briefly. Despite pressure from Caspar and Warburton to leave Gilbert, she returns to him, arguing that breaking her marriage vows would render her morally bankrupt, akin to Madame Merle. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.